Hello everybody, so today I'm going to be doing my secret prehistory number 5, I believe. I'm up to 5, and this one is about whether the Sumerian culture could really have been as old as they say it was, as old as the Sumerians say it was, which is 500,000 years old. So I'm going to get onto a number of different definitions here and why we get a bit confused. So the Sumerians, according to official history, anywhere from about 6 to 8 to 10,000 years old. That's pretty much it. And there's a few different dates that we've got there, but that's really the range. I'm not going to get into very specifics, because if you want to look at the specifics of what people claim, you can always look that up, and I'm not about repeating what other people have done. This is about my new thing. I'm adding new stuff. So if you want to look that up, go ahead. You can find 7,193 years, or however old someone says it is, which are disputed, because we don't have really very reliable history as far as dates for that long ago, let alone for 500,000 years ago. So why do I say 500,000 years? I'm not the one saying that. They are. So in the actual Sumerian records, they had, one thing was they had a list of kings. They also had other lists. But the list of kings documents the rulers of different Sumerian kingdoms. And again, we've got to remember their word for Sumer, or their word Sumer meant earth. It didn't mean them. They called themselves Shinar, which meant black-headed people. Or some people have described that was Homo sapiens. And of course then they describe a different type of humans called Adamu, which meant red-headed people. Curiously, but they use that to mean slave people. But they say that they didn't enslave the Adamu. They were enslaved by their gods on earth, the Anunnaki. And in fact, they were freed by the other gods on earth, the Igigi. And so there's a bit of interesting stuff about all that. But anyway, essentially, they've said that their first kings, 500,000 years ago, and they say that the first kings were the Anunnaki, the gods on earth, and they ruled, or actually not the Anunnaki, but other people, that they ruled, and there's 500,000 years of lineage. But of course then they said, well, two of them, two brothers, were ruled for 100,000 years, or 128,000 years, I think it is. So that's a bit long for a lifespan, but then they said, well, they weren't humans. They weren't any kind of humans. They were in fact gods on earth. So the first kings, they lived that long because they weren't humans. Now, of course, they describe their gods as being aliens. They say they were gods, but they came from another planet. And here we get with the idea that if the gods were not really gods, they may well have been aliens, and they were just simply worshipped as gods. And a number of ancient cultures did that they described their gods as aliens, as what we would today call aliens. Of course, then there's essentially, I suppose there's three views of what gods are. Number one is that we made them up. Number two is that they're spiritual beings. And number three is that they're aliens. They're pretty much it. I suppose there's a fourth one where they're just simply people that are playing tricks on you, but, that's really, then they're not really gods. So they sort of went, for whatever reason, the Sumerians went with the idea that their gods were aliens, and that's what they described them. They're not the only culture to do that. But not every culture has done that either. Certainly the Jews do not describe their gods as aliens. They describe them as gods, as spiritual beings who were not from another planet. They were not aliens. They make it very clear that they were not. But the Sumerians said they were, or their lot were. That's not to say nobody else's were real gods, but theirs were aliens. And they're not saying they weren't real gods, they're saying they were gods, but they were aliens. So, but anyway, 500,000 years. So, can we accept that 500,000 years as being factual? Well, the first thing to note were humans around that long ago? And the simple answer is yes. So, pre-human hominids were anywhere from 4 to 8 million, and I've said it could have been up to 10. But even if we take the lower version, 4 million, that's easily before the 500,000 year mark. And so they would have been capable of recognising all that. So yes, definitely could have had a society, could have had all that. Second one is, did we have humans? Well, humans have been around since for 2.5 million years. So, 80% of humanity's existence had already taken place before we get to the Sumerians or the Anunnaki or the gods on Earth. So yeah, easily, it's fitting within those time totals. So I mean, I'd argue even if we went to 4 million years, it would be believable. But certainly at 500,000, absolutely, there's not even any debate about that. Now, the earliest known Homo sapiens were 380,000, so we weren't yet Homo sapiens. So, and then we have Homo sapiens sapiens, which is the current version of humans, and that's 170,000 or 160,000, I think. And I mean, again, this is fossil record. May have been a bit earlier than that, but probably not much earlier. So we're a little bit too early to be Homo sapiens, let alone Homo sapiens sapiens. So Homo sapiens sapiens basically look like us, act like us, and pretty much, maybe they were a bit shorter, but otherwise we're pretty much the same. We haven't really changed very much. But even if you go to Homo sapiens, which is from about, let's say about 370, 380,000 years ago, they didn't look much different to us. They looked fairly similar. Now, Neanderthals were about 400,000. They looked a bit different, but they weren't so different that we would have said, oh no, they're aliens. No, we would have still said, oh, they're humans. So what do we have before that? What was the 500,000 year ago thing? We weren't apes. We stopped being apes about anywhere from 4 to 8 million years ago. So we weren't this thing on all fours or with a tail or with lots of hair or anything like that. We looked reasonably similar to how we look today. So, and would we have had religion? Well, the earliest religion claims to be 2.3 million years. And that's the earliest religion that's still practiced today. And that's, of course, the animalistic religions, the fairies. That sort of thing, the Celtic sort of thing. Now, of course, that might not be the real one, but I think it probably is. It does add up. So, was that a society? This is one thing. Now, a lot of people, you might hear this thing, they say, oh, society spontaneously erupted in 12, 15, 20 different places at once within a short period of time. Now, that's true from the point of view of if we define society or civilization as having certain minimum requirements. That is a certain population size, let's say 50,000 people all in the same small geographic area. They have to be structured in a certain way, they have to be advanced to a certain level and so forth. And I would describe this in a way as if you said, all right, let's say today that we said, okay, we're going to define civilized as there being at least 80%, let's say at least 50% of the population of the whole country has an iPhone Model 10 or above. All right, at least 50%. Now, if you went around the world, you'd probably find only a fairly small proportion would have that. Only, let's say 15, 20 countries would have that. Say, oh, okay. But these 15 or 20 countries are not necessarily the richest countries. They're the ones that can afford that iPhones are cheap in their country, that iPhone hasn't banned it. So, for example, Russia and China would not be in that list, even though they're reasonably wealthy. I wouldn't say they're rich, but they're up there because their countries ban iPhones or iPhone ban them, whichever way around it is. So, but that's essentially our definition of civilization, is that we have to meet these minimum requirements. And essentially what would have happened is that we had, what we're saying, we're not saying that humanity started then, or that was the birth of everything. No, we're saying that essentially we had these population centres all around the world, and there's probably a lot more than just 15 or 20, there's probably more like 200, 300, and some of them, or let's say one of them advanced enough, and we don't know which one happened first, but one of them advanced enough to meet the what we today call civilization, and then all these other ones went, oh well, let's do the same thing. And so they all had it. And again, I think the iPhone thing is a reasonable metaphor, because that's what we might say today. Or we might say, all right, how many people have computers, internet, mobile phone, smartphone, whatever our definition is. so that it'd be 10% of the population or 10% of the countries in the world. We might say, all right, how many people speak English? We might say, all right, they have to have at least 80% of the population speak English. And then you say, okay, well, what about Germany? Well, only a few people speak English there. Okay. What about Hong Kong? Okay, a few do. And then you say, oh, look, China's so uncivilized, none of them speak English, or very few of them. And, you know, because it's not an English-speaking country. So whatever definition you use, it's going to be wrong. And I use one example. So here in Australia, we have Australian Aboriginals who have been around, we currently believe, 65,000 years. So before that, we don't believe there was any previous humans on Australia before the Australian Aboriginals. So they came 65,000 years ago. We don't believe that there was anyone before them. Of course, they came from Africa, same as everyone else. They came from Mauritius, which no longer exists, but Madagascar is sort of in a bit of the spot because it used to be a massive landmass. But Madagascar, Mauritius are two islands that they used to be a solid continent there. But that continent since shrunk, split up, and there's only those two islands left. There might be a bit more, but yeah, so essentially they came from there. And they're related to Indians, of course, 65,000 years apart. But yeah, so if you look at that, they say that Australian Aboriginals were uncivilized, as at when the English came to Australia. I'm not saying Europeans, the English. And then people say, well, that's a bit rude, say they're uncivilized, but according to the definition of civilization, they didn't meet that. And so but then you go and you say, okay, does that mean they're stupid and awful and terrible? They say, no, well, Aboriginals had very advanced knowledge of, well, dealing with different parts of nature, with medicine, with agriculture, how to deal with fires and floods and all sorts of things like this. And you say, well, that's not uncivilized. But our definition of civilization says that it was. And there's still societies today, or groups of people today, who do not meet the definition of civilization that we were all told. So if we have that and we say, okay, you're going to Sumer 500,000 years ago and you're saying, okay, they didn't become civilized until 10,000 years ago, that doesn't mean that they weren't there and just didn't meet the requirements for civilization, or our current requirements. They didn't have their iPhones. So you say, okay, not literally the iPhones, but you know what I mean. I hope you know what I mean. You might not, but that's what I mean. So they were there, they existed, they were in that area, there were people there, they called themselves Shinar, and they had people that they called, or gods or aliens or whatever they were, called themselves Anunnaki, but they didn't meet the requirements of civilization. And I think you can say, well, probably yes. There's been bones there, yes, there were people. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing is, what if they actually were civilized and that they did meet the requirements of civilization, but the evidence has disappeared? Let's not forget that we have had cataclysms every 25,000 years, and we had one not long before we suddenly had all these civilizations spring up. The last cataclysm, 11,400 years ago roughly, called the Younger Dryas, some people call it the Great Flood, or Great Deluge. They're the same thing, by the way. And so this one wiped out 99% of all population of plants and animals, 75% of species. So 99% of humans as well, not just humans, but every animal, every plant. And just destroyed absolutely everything that was there. Now, we don't know what was there, but if we had one of them today, not much would be alive. Not much would survive. Not just life, but buildings too. Unless we've got amazing buildings with incredible architecture designed to survive such a thing, or coincidentally survive such a thing, houses wouldn't survive it. I mean, houses probably only last 100 years, maybe some of them last 300 or 400 years, that's about it. They're not going to survive that long anyway, even without a cataclysm. But with a cataclysm, there's no chance. So they could have had anything up to it, including something that would survive it, or wouldn't quite survive it, and it would all be destroyed. And why would they be creating things designed to live that long and survive that long and not be destroyed? You wouldn't. It'd be too expensive. So, and I mean, there's a reason why we don't do it today. We could, well, to some extent. I mean, why don't we build castles anymore? Because castles are just too expensive. It's not worth it. Even billionaires don't build houses that are designed to last for thousands of years. They just don't. You build houses that you spend, $28 million on a house or whatever you want to spend on it, and it's still only going to survive for 50, 100 years because, that's long enough. That's your lifetime. Why do you want it to survive for your children and your children's children? I mean, you're not alive, so why do you care? So, yeah, so I think that, and we can go into that separately, I think, but there is a very, very strong chance that we have been more powerful before than we are today, and that it goes up and down, up and down, up and down, going down certainly with cataclysms. I'm not talking about wars, diseases, all that sort of thing as well, but I mean just natural cataclysms. So even without us killing each other and all that, which probably happens as well, but just with natural events. And I mean, you'd think that the most advanced we would be, you'd probably think, would be just before a cataclysm. So we still have probably another 10,000, 8,000 years before our next cataclysm. Even if we're really unlucky, we still have another 3,000. That'd be the minimum. So we're nowhere near our peak before it all gets destroyed. So once we're at the level where it's about to all get destroyed, that's when we'll be at our peak. We're not there yet. So you would think that until we get to that stage, I'd expect when the next cataclysm comes, we will be more powerful than we've ever been before in human history. But until we get there, or until we get close to that, we won't be as strong as we have been in the past. Because, of course, it gets destroyed every time. Now, I'd hope that a little bit would be remembered, but not much. You'd pretty much be starting again. In fact, there's probably going to be a period of destroying technology on purpose, because we sort of blame it for the cataclysm and all that sort of thing. So, is there a chance that they were actually reasonably civilized? Probably. The other thing is, the Sumerians don't claim to be a highly advanced civilization 500,000 years ago. They don't. They claim to have been fairly simple, and that's very believable. So look, I can't say, and I'm certainly not going to say that the Anunnaki were definitely aliens or were definitely gods or were definitely anything other than just make it up, and I also am not going to say that they definitely lived for 138,000 years or anything like that. But I can say that it's very probable that Sumerians or somebody was there 500,000 years ago. I think I can't guarantee that, I wasn't there, but I think it's quite likely. Anyway, that's it from me. Bye bye now.